10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 420. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 420 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. This week we are continuing our series on the 5-to-1 progression, and I've got a really fun exercise for you this week, one that I love to practice. This is actually one of the main ways that I work on my 5-to-1 motion. So I'm really excited about this, and we're going to dive into it. So in previous episodes, we've been sort of sticking in one key, and there's a really good reason for that, because what we want to do is we just want to wrap our ears and our brains and our fingers around what it means to go from a 5 chord to a 1 chord. So that work has been extremely valuable for me. And I hope that it has been extremely valuable for you as well, because I think that if we can start to conceive of that 5-to-1 and develop some skills that are beyond like dealing with the different keys and what that means for our actual instruments, we can start to transfer it to other keys almost automatically. And the only thing we have to make sure of is that our instrument is together, right? That our skills on our instrument are not totally lacking, that we've done some work in the keys, we've done our homework, we've done some work with scales and 12 keys, and we kind of know our way around. That's obviously an ongoing piece of work that will last for the rest of your life. But what we've gone over so far is really just dealing with and being able to hear and handle that 5-to-1 progression. Now we are going to move into a pretty cool exercise that does bring us around to all 12 keys. And it's a pretty slick exercise because it's what I call perpetual motion, which means you don't have to stop. Right? You can just get through all 12 keys. And the cool part about it is that it gives us the ability to deal with this 5-to-1 motion, but the way that it transitions into the next key is actually really useful. And you will see this in a ton of different tunes. So let's dive into it. So we're going to be dealing with major keys. And we're going to be dealing with a plain old 5-to-1, meaning like no alterations, right? So what we will start with, and if you're a Patreon member, just grab your PDF and start looking at this, because it'll all make sense as you see it and you hear it. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to start with a plain old 5-to-1 progression, 1 bar each. So I've started it in concert with a concert C7 chord, which is the 5 of F major. So we get that 5-to-1 sound right off the bat. Now that should sound pretty familiar to you if you've been paying attention this month so far. But now what we're going to do is we're going to take the chord that we've arrived at, the 1 chord, F major, and we're simply going to turn it into the 5 of the next key. So we're going to go from F major 7 to F7. And now that chord is no longer a 1 chord. Now it is the 5 of B flat major. And then you guessed it, we're going to turn B flat major into B flat 7. And then that's going to be the 5 of E flat major, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's this really cool way of not having to like stop and start over again in a different key, which I will say there's still a lot of merit to that type of work, right? So if you start working on this exercise and you're like, oh, geez, I can't do this. This is like too much for me. Well, don't worry about it. Don't stress out about that. Just simply go through the keys on their own and see if you can spend some time with each of the 12 keys. Maybe create a backing track for yourself on iReal or whatever, And then when you feel like you're ready to go through all the keys, you can come back to this exercise. But what I want you to do right now is I simply want you to close your eyes and listen to that motion. So it's 5, 1, then the 1 becomes the 5 of the next key, and then we resolve to 1, and then that 1 becomes the 5 of the next key. And what this results in is movement around the circle of fourths. So listen to it. And I won't go all the way around the circle because you get the idea, right? And if you could really hear that major chord turning into a dominant chord, that's what we're looking for. And that's the thing that I'm talking about that happens in literally dozens, if not hundreds of tunes. And you'll start to see it all over the place. You'll start to actually hear it all over the place. If you could really hear that one chord becoming the 5 of a next key up a fourth, okay? So I mentioned the circle of fourths. Now, you ever wonder why the circle of fourths is so popular in jazz education circles? It's exactly because of that thing. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about how we can harness the power of the circle of fourths. But this is a great way because we're going from the key of F to B flat, to E flat, to A flat, to D flat, and so on and so forth, right? So we're moving up a fourth each time. Now, so many of you will already know this. So what I'm about to say might seem obvious to a lot of you, right? But if you think about going up a fourth from F to B flat, that's the same as going down a fifth, F down to B flat. So the interval of a fourth, when we flip it, when we reverse directions, becomes the interval of a fifth. So again, that's why the circle of fourths is so important because, yeah, we're going up fourths, but really we're going down fifths. So it becomes to like this 5 to 1 perpetual motion exercise that can get you through all 12 keys, right? And if you think about it, a 2-5-1 is just that motion, right? So if we have G to C to F. Well, what I did right there was I went from G up a fourth to C and then down a fifth to F. And that's how we get that 5 to 1 relationship. So just know that if you've never thought about that before, how fourths and fifths are so related, well, now it might make a lot of sense when you're looking at tunes or when you're thinking about a lot of the ways that teachers will tell you to practice. They'll tell you to practice around the circle of fourths. And why we all do that is it makes so much sense. It's like, yeah, you're working on the circle of fourths, but really you're also hearing these 5 to 1 resolutions. Okay? So your job this week is one of two things, all right? I want you to try this exercise where we are pretty rapidly, 1 bar each, doing that 5 to 1, and that becomes the 5 of the next key to 1, that becomes the 5 of the next key to 1. Try that out. See if you can do that. And if you can't, just mark down the problem keys where you really don't know what you're doing and loop those keys. Just do the 5 to 1 progression in those keys. But if you have success when you try it, I want you to spend the week for, 10, 15 minutes a day, just working on this particular PDF that I'm giving you this week with the backing track that I'll be providing for you. And the $5 Patreon members will also get a trading track as usual so that we can play a little bit together. All right. So that's the assignment for this week. I hope you do well with it. Now, if you're new to the show and you don't know what I'm talking about when I say the Patreon members, we're a listener-supported podcast, which means that we don't do ads on the show. Instead, we just rely on the people that are getting the benefits out of this to support us and keep the podcast coming out. We do that through the Patreon platform. So if you want to learn more, support the podcast, and become a member of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson family, just simply head over to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com, and click on one of the Patreon banners, or you can go to patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson. There's a couple of different options on levels of support. They're all very, very reasonable. And that's the reason why these podcasts keep coming out. So again, 10minutejazzlesson.com, click on one of the Patreon banners, or patreon.com and search for the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson. You can get instant access to every episode that we have ever done and all the tools that go along with those. Fantastic resource for a very low price. Shout out to some new patrons this week. Thank you to Armin, and thank you to John, Pisciata, and Annabelle. Thank you guys so much for joining up to support the show. And to everybody over there that's supporting us, I think we've got almost 375 members now. Thank you. We could not do this without you. All right, everybody. Have fun this week, and we'll see you next week with our final episode in this series. Bye.